We here at the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights would like to talk about discrimination in housing, specifically discrimination based on sex, gender expression, and gender identity, as well as sexual orientation. Today we're going to go over a few do and don't scenarios to help demonstrate your rights to housing free from discrimination. But first, we're going to talk about a few of our laws and definitions. Today, we'll be talking about harassment and fair housing laws, quid pro quo harassment, hostile environment harassment, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and how to file a complaint, as well as other available resources. So who is the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights? We are a city agency devoted to advancing equity and upholding the federal and local civil rights laws, the local living and prevailing wage laws, and providing oversight of local law enforcement. The mission of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights is to carry out activities to eliminate inequity, inequality, and discrimination. Within the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights is the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission, which seeks to investigate claims of discrimination and assist people who have been discriminated against by enforcing the laws that protect them. The Baltimore Community Relations Commission combats unlawful discrimination in employment, public accommodation, housing, education, and health and welfare services.
Throughout today's presentation, you may hear us or see us use several acronyms. Here are what some of them mean. HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The FHA, the Fair Housing Act as amended. DOJ, the U.S. Department of Justice. MCCR, the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. CRC, Community Relations Commission. SSI, Supplemental Security Income. SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance.
So let's start by talking about the fair housing laws that protect you from harassment in housing. Throughout today's presentation, we'll be having some test your knowledge questions to see how much you've learned by the end of today's lesson. Our first question: what year was the Fair Housing Act amended to include sex as a protected class? Answers will be provided throughout today's presentation. The first law that we're going to discuss is the Fair Housing Act of 1968 as amended. This federal fair housing law prohibits housing discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and familial status. Now, let's learn about the history of the Fair Housing Act, courtesy of the National Fair Housing Alliance and Nationwide Insurance.
Few in the nation believed that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken, and no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community.
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out.
I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they are allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Cause you're present, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take my, you'll take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
The fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement that we have
changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
It is important to note that harassment based on all protected classes is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act. This includes harassment based on disability, religion, national origin, and sex. Today, we will mostly focus on harassment based on sex. Because harassment based on sex is prohibited, sexual harassment in housing is also prohibited. Sexual harassment in housing includes demands for sex or sexual acts in order to buy, rent, or continue renting a home. It also includes other unwelcome sexual conduct that makes it hard to keep living in or feel comfortable in your home. The Fair Housing Act protects both men and women from sex discrimination, including sexual harassment. For example, it is a violation of the Fair Housing Act for a female property owner, manager, agent, employee, or contractor to sexually harass a male applicant, tenant, or resident. The Fair Housing Act also protects men and women from sex discrimination, including same-sex sexual harassment. It is a violation of the Fair Housing Act for a property owner, manager, agent, employee, or contractor to sexually harass an applicant, tenant, or resident, even if the harasser and the victim are the same sex. In addition to the Fair Housing Act, HUD's Equal Access Rule prohibits owners with housing assistant payment contracts from making housing unavailable because of an applicant or resident's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. In addition to the Fair Housing Act and HUD's Equal Access Rule, there's also the Sexual Harassment in Housing Initiative, which is an effort to combat sexual harassment in housing led by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. The goal of the initiative is to address sexual harassment by landlords, property managers, maintenance workers, loan officers, or other people who have control over housing. In addition to those federal laws, we also have local state laws. State Government Article 20 of the Annotated Code of Maryland prohibits housing discrimination on all federally protected bases, in addition to marital status, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression. Here in Baltimore City, Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code prohibits housing discrimination on all federal and state protected bases, in addition to age, ancestry, and source of income. It is important to remember that all individuals involved in housing comply with fair housing law. This includes maintenance and contractors, safety personnel, marketing and administrative staff, and more. Now we have our second Test Your Knowledge question. What duties do property owners or property managers have to prevent or stop sexual harassment. When it comes to liability for sexual harassment, anyone in the housing process can be held liable, including landlords, maintenance workers, contractors, leasing agents, security, and more. Under the Fair Housing Act, a property owner who knows about one of his or her employees engaging in sexual harassment and fails to take action can also be held liable for any resulting harm. A property owner or property manager also has a duty not to engage in sexual harassment. Additionally, a property owner or manager has the duty to ensure that his or her employees or agents do not engage in sexual harassment. If a property owner or manager knows or should have known that an employee, agent, or contractor is sexually harassing applicants, tenants, or residents, he or she has the duty to take action to stop the harassment. Some courts have also held that owners and managers, including condominium associations, liable in situations where they knew of tenant-on-tenant harassment and did not take remedial action. There are a few exemptions from the Fair Housing Act. This includes owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 rental units. This is known as a Mrs. Murphy exemption. And again, the owner must reside in one of the units.
Single-family housing rented or sold without the use of a broker if the private individual owner owns no more than 3 such single-family homes at one time.
2 additional exemptions from the Fair Housing Act include housing operated by religious organizations and private clubs that limit occupancy to their own members, as well as housing exclusively reserved for senior citizens. So this housing typically falls into the categories of 62 and older housing or 55 and older housing. There are additionally exemptions from Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code. This includes single-sex housing where the physical limitations or configuration of the housing facility or considerations of personal privacy or personal safety make it inappropriate for the facility to be occupied by persons of both sexes. Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code also provides an exemption for the rental of not more than 2 rooming units in a dwelling by any person if the person resides in the dwelling unit. In 2018, there were 139 complaints of harassment in housing based on sex nationally. So to begin our discussion on harassment, we will first discuss quid pro quo harassment. Quid pro quo harassment occurs when a housing provider requires a person to submit to an unwelcome request to engage in sexual conduct as a condition of obtaining or maintaining housing or housing-related services. Let's look at an example of quid pro quo harassment.
Hey, pretty lady, come on in.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I have a little problem. I'm going to be a little bit late on my rent. I was wondering if I can make a payment plan because I don't get paid until next week.
Hold on one second. It appears that you were late last month, and now you're going to be late again this month. You know, I'm not in the habit of doing that for most people, and I tell you what I can do though. Give me a nasty little treat. I can work something out. You won't have to pay the rent at all.
Ew, oh my God!
Absolutely not. This is housing discrimination based on sex. In this particular case, the landlord is participating in quid pro quo harassment. This occurs when a housing provider requires or requests that a person to give in to an unwelcome request to engage in sexual conduct in exchange for getting or maintaining housing or housing-related services. This type of behavior is prohibited by law.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm here today because I'm going to be a little late on the rent this month.
Oh, is there a reason why you're late? Because you were, let me see something, because I think, you were late last month too. Is there a reason?
Well, I'm trying the best I can, but I really don't even get paid until the 5th of each month, so that's why I'm definitely going to pay next week though.
Oh, you should have told me. Okay, we can work something. We can make a note of that.
Okay.
And you'll get it to us on the 5th?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Anything else I can do?
That's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That scenario shows an example of quid pro quo harassment. It also demonstrates how a situation like that should be handled by a housing professional. Now that you've seen an example of quid pro quo harassment, let's discuss a few more. It would be considered quid pro quo harassment if a maintenance man refuses to make repairs unless a tenant gives him nude photos of herself. If a landlord tells an applicant he won't rent her an apartment unless she has sex with him, or a property manager evicts a tenant after she refuses to perform sexual acts. The following is a famous case that held that sexual harassment in housing violates the Fair Housing Act. In this particular case, Shellhammer v. Llewellyn, the owner of the tenant's building asked her to pose for nude photos. When she refused, she and her husband were evicted. The district court found that the eviction was in response to the tenant's rejection and that the owner's conduct constituted quid pro quo sexual harassment. Now, let's discuss the second type of harassment, hostile environment harassment. Hostile environment harassment occurs when unwelcome conduct is sufficiently severe or pervasive as to create an environment that unreasonably interferes with the availability, sale, rental, use, or enjoyment of a dwelling, the provision or enjoyment of facilities or services related to that housing, or the availability or terms of residential real estate-related transactions. Harassment can be written, verbal, or other conduct and does not require physical contact. Factors to be considered to determine whether hostile environment harassment exists include, but are not limited to, the nature of the conduct, the context in which the incidents occurred, the severity, scope, frequency, duration, and location of the conduct, and the relationships of the persons involved. Neither psychological nor physical harm must be demonstrated to prove that a hostile environment exists. Evidence of psychological or physical harm may, however, be relevant in determining whether a hostile environment existed and, if so, the amount of damages to which an aggrieved person may be entitled. Whether unwelcome conduct is sufficiently severe or pervasive as to create a hostile environment is evaluated from the perspective of a reasonable person in the aggrieved person's position. For our third Test Your Knowledge question of the day, is it a violation of the Fair Housing Act when a woman sexually harasses a man? As we recently discussed, there are two main types of hostile environment harassment: pervasive harassment and severe harassment. Pervasive harassment involves less serious conduct that happens frequently over a period of time. Let's now look at an example of pervasive harassment.
Who is it?
Me.
Oh, yes, please, come in. Hello.
Hello. I heard that you got a hole that you need plugged.
Yeah, I got mice. They come from the back of the refrigerator.
The back, huh?
Yeah, back. There's a hole back there.
Let me take a look at this hole. This little hole right here?
Mm-hmm.
Seems like it's too tight to get a mouse through.
There's mice.
What you want me to fill it with?
Whatever you need to fill it with. Can you just fix it, please?
I can fix your hole. When you want this done?
As soon as possible.
I'll get it done for you. How about you take my card, and that way if you got any other problems, maybe if you need your pipes laid, you give me a call.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get back to this hole soon, all right?
Okay, thank you.
You take care now. Doors open.
Maintenance.
Oh, finally.
So I hear you need some hose plugged up. Huh? Can I help you, baby? What you need?
Yes, I have a mouse hole behind my fridge. Just right back here.
Back here?
Back there.
Back there? Oh, okay. Let's see. Yeah, I can see that you do have a mouse hole back there. I'll put in a request
Great, thank
for
you.
it to be fixed.
Thank you very much.
And if you need anything else, got any other issues, give me a call.
I'll do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who is it? Maintenance. Can I help you?
I noticed last time I was here that your pipes had some cobwebs on them. So I brought the latex to clear them out.
I'm good.
No, won't you let me take a look at those for you?
No, I think I'm all right.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's no problem. It's part of the job. I got a lot of experience.
I've got it handled already.
15 years to be exact.
That's awesome that you've been working that long, but I don't need your assistance today.
Well, you just keep that card handy.
I do. I have your card, and if I need you, I'll let you know.
You want to hold on to the latex?
No, you can go on with that. Thank you.
It's no problem.
Calling the supervisor. Hello?
Hey.
Who is this?
It's Marcus from maintenance. Yeah. I was wondering if we could go out sometime.
I don't think I will be comfortable with that.
Oh man, we can always be friends though. I love being friends with pretty women.
I don't think I'll be comfortable with that either.
Oh come on. But I've been so nice. I came over right away. I even fixed your garbage disposal before you put in a request. I really stuck out my neck for you. I wasn't supposed to do that. And you don't even want to be my friend?
Sir, I didn't ask for you to make any special exceptions for me. And honestly, you made me feel very uncomfortable each time you've been here. I'm hanging up now, so please don't call again.
Fine. See if I do any more repairs for you.
That scenario shows an example of pervasive harassment, smaller acts that occur over the course of time. Another example of pervasive harassment would be if a leasing consultant makes frequent comments about a resident's body every time she visits the swimming pool, to the point where his behavior makes her stop visiting the swimming pool. For our fourth Test Your Knowledge question, can a property owner or property manager be held liable if a tenant sexually harasses another tenant? Now that we've talked about pervasive harassment, let's discuss severe harassment. This may happen in one episode or various episodes that involve a particularly offensive comment or some sort of physical touching. Let's look at an example of severe harassment.
Hello. I'd like to make a complaint. I'm being harassed by my neighbors.
How are you being harassed?
Well, I woke up this morning and I found this note on my door.
Well, what do you want me to do about it?
I don't know, find out who sent it, or send out a letter to the neighbors telling them they can't just harass me and threaten my life.
Okay, look, before I start renting to you people, I never had this problem.
What do you mean, you people?
You know, you gays need to start acting right. I have no control over what they do. Good luck.
Are you serious? Can they just get away with something like this?
This is an example of severe discrimination based on sexual orientation, which is a Maryland state protected class. Discriminating, harassing, or allowing harassment to continue against someone based on their sexual orientation violates the tenant's fair housing rights. This could also be considered sex discrimination under the Fair Housing Act, specific circumstances.
Hello. I'd like to make a complaint. I'm being harassed by my neighbors.
What happened?
Well, I woke up this morning and I found this note on my door.
Let me see. Oh, I'm so sorry that you have to experience this. We do not tolerate this type of behavior in our properties. We will conduct a thorough investigation, and we will also send out notices to remind everyone of our anti-harassment policy.
Oh, well, thank you.
No problem at all. Any type of harassment is not tolerated here, so thank you so much for voicing your concerns.
Well, thank you for listening to them.
This is a much better way for a landlord to address harassment.
Now that you have seen an example of severe harassment and how these concerns should be handled by a housing provider, let's discuss a few more examples. Another example of severe harassment would be if a transgender woman is being threatened with violence by neighbors. When she complains, she is asked by the owner of her apartment building not to dress in women's clothing in the common areas of the property. This may violate the Fair Housing Act's prohibition against sex discrimination, which includes discrimination based on nonconformity with gender stereotypes, as well as local laws. Another example would include if a gay man is evicted because his landlord believes he will infect other tenants with HIV or AIDS. This may violate the Fair Housing Act's prohibition against disability discrimination, which includes discrimination against people who have or are perceived to have HIV or AIDS. Another famous case as it pertains to hostile environment harassment is Quigley versus Winter. In this case, Jamie Quigley, the plaintiff, and her children rented a house from Dale Winter, the defendant, using a housing choice voucher. Over the course of a few years, Winter made several inappropriate sexual advances toward Quigley, including touching her sexually, showing up at her house late at night and unannounced, staying longer than he was welcome after conducting inspections of the house, and making sexual comments about her 14-year-old sister. Quigley sued for the hostile housing environment created by sexual harassment, as well as quid pro quo sexual harassment and coercion, intimidation, and interference with housing rights, among other things. The jury found in favor of Quigley on all claims and awarded her over $13,685 in compensatory damages. The judge also awarded $250,000 in punitive damages. As we just discussed some examples of sexual harassment having to do with sexual orientation and gender identity, it's important that we now discuss the definitions. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, as amended, prohibits discrimination in housing and housing-related transactions because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and familial status. Although federal law does recognize sex, it does not explicitly recognize sexual orientation and gender identity. However, the state government Article 20 of the Annotated Code of Maryland does explicitly recognize sexual orientation and gender identity and expression as a protected class, as does Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code. So for our fifth Test Your Knowledge question, what is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? So the definition of sexual orientation, as defined by local fair housing laws, include a person's identity in relation to the gender or genders to which they are sexually attracted to. Such discrimination can be based either upon the individual's choice of appearance and who they are sexually attracted to. Local fair housing laws define gender identity and expression as a person's behavior, mannerisms, interests, and appearance that are associated with gender in a particular cultural context. Some prohibited practices based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression include refusing to make repairs because of a tenant's sexual orientation, evicting a tenant based on their gender identity or sexual orientation, subjecting a tenant to severe or pervasive unwelcome touching, kissing, or groping, or making unwelcomed or lewd comments about a tenant's body, or sending unwelcomed sexually aggressive text messages. The final case we'll discuss today is Smith versus Avanti. Lambda Legal filed a federal discrimination lawsuit against a Boulder County property owner who violated the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act by refusing to rent a housing unit she owns in Gold Hill, Colorado, to a same-sex couple, one of whom is transgendered, and their children because she worried their uniqueness would jeopardize her standing in the community. The lawsuit, filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Colorado, asserts that Avanti engaged in discrimination on the basis of sex and familial status in violation of the Fair Housing Act and Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act. It also asserts that Avanti discriminated against Tanya and Rachel on the basis of sexual orientation and transgender status in violation of the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. For the first time in federal court, Judge Moore also found that the property owner's anti-LGBT discrimination violated the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination based on sex, including stereotypes about sex. While we have talked about prohibited practices as it relates to sexual harassment in housing, it is also important to point out a few additional prohibited practices, one of which is retaliation. It is unlawful to retaliate against any person because that person has made a complaint, testified, assisted, or participated in any manner in a proceeding under the Fair Housing Act, as well as state and local laws. Retaliation typically occurs if a management company decides to evict a tenant who previously filed a complaint against the landlord. So now that we've discussed many prohibited practices, let's change gear and talk about some best practices for housing providers when it comes to preventing sexual harassment. The first is to establish and enforce anti-harassment policies to help stop inappropriate or offensive conduct early, before it becomes a violation of the Fair Housing Act. The next is to provide multiple ways for tenants to safely and easily make complaints or otherwise report problems. Housing providers can also attend fair housing training that includes information about preventing harassment and should require any staff to do so as well. Housing providers should also take measures to ensure that people who report harassment are protected from retaliation. Additionally, housing providers should talk to tenants to find out whether harassment is occurring and to teach them about their fair housing rights and how to report harassment. Finally, housing providers should consider hiring or designating a complaint coordinator whose primary responsibility is to investigate reports or complaints thoroughly and take the necessary corrective actions quickly. So now that we've talked about the different kinds of sexual harassment in housing, as well as additional prohibited practices and best practices for housing providers, let's discuss how to file a complaint and learn about other relevant resources. So our final test your knowledge question: does an individual have to report sexual harassment to the property owner or property manager? In terms of jurisdictional requirements to file a fair housing complaint, in order to file with the CRC, the alleged discriminatory action must have taken place in the past 180 days. To file with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, the alleged discrimination must have taken place in the past year. To file a private lawsuit, the alleged discrimination must have taken place in the past 2 years. Cases of sexual harassment in housing and other pattern and practice cases may be initiated at a later time. So in order to file a complaint with the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission, again, the alleged discrimination must have taken place within Baltimore City in the last 180 days. Individuals can file a complaint online at civilrights.baltimorecity.gov/communityrelationscommission/file or call 410-396-3143. Individuals can also make an appointment with our intake officer by calling 410-396-3143 or emailing crcintake@baltimorecity.gov. So what happens when a fair housing complaint is filed with the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission? First, the individual comes in to file the complaint. The individual will sit down with our intake officer who will help them draft their complaint, and then they will approve that complaint and sign it. Next, the housing provider will receive notice. Within 10 days, the CRC will inform the housing provider that a complaint has been filed against them. After receiving notice of the complaint, mediation is offered. Parties can choose to mediate a complaint through a third party at no charge. Both parties must agree to mediation. If not, the investigation begins. During the investigation, the assigned investigator will request relevant documents, interview witnesses and others involved, as well as request any other necessary information. Finally, the CRC will make a finding of either no probable cause or probable cause. If probable cause to believe that the discriminatory actions did take place is found, conciliation will begin. As previously stated, complaints can also be filed with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development within 1 year. Complaints can also be filed with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights within 1 year. In regards to reporting to property management, A sexual harassment victim is not required to follow the particular sexual harassment reporting procedures of the property owner or property manager. However, a sexual harassment victim may want to make a written report or send a letter to the property owner or manager in order to create a record of the harassment and to provide the property owner or manager the opportunity to take action to stop the harassment. In addition to reporting complaints of sexual harassment in housing to the federal or local agencies just described, those who are victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking may also seek remedies under the Violence Against Women Act. This allows for certain individuals to seek emergency transfers. You can also report sexual harassment in housing to the Department of Justice. You can call the Sexual Harassment in Housing Initiative at 1-844-380-6178. You can also send an email to fairhousing@usdoj.gov. Now that we've talked about all the ways that you can report sexual harassment in housing, let's talk about some additional resources that are available to those who may have experienced harassment.
Hello, my name is Sarojini Shah. I'm a community educator with Turnaround. I work in the community engagement and training team. And we have been in the city and county for about 42 years now. We started in 1978. So we provide a bunch of different services. We are the Rape Crisis Center hotline for Baltimore City. So we serve victims, survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, child sexual abuse, and any victimization that kind of falls into that pathway. Our main service that we provide is case management and therapy and training. So we have in our Towson office, that is where we work with the county, we have therapy. Our therapists range in age. They can kind of do any age. We make sure that anyone who has experienced anything from age 5 years old to age 98 years old, we want to make sure they can get therapy. So all of our services are free. And we don't ask for insurance either. So they can get therapy at our Towson office. They can work with a case manager if they have multiple things they need to do. And then we also have in our Towson office is our legal services. So for our legal services, we have our own legal team, our legal aid team, and we work with Maryland Legal Aid as well to provide more services to people. So we get about 2 to 3 attorneys from them. And they kind of rotate in and out a bit, but we've had the same ones for a few years now, and they've been great. So again, those services are free if you're looking to get a criminal record expunged because it's preventing you from getting housing. If you need a peace or protective order, you need court accompaniment, you're going to court and you just don't know the process, or you need support in it, if you're a witness on the stand, whatever it is, we want to be there for you every step of the way. So we have our legal aid accompany you at the court, and also with that, we can help with like housing things as well. So our legal aid services, if you're running into troubles with a landlord, or you need to get out of a lease agreement, we can kind of help you with that, particularly when it is with domestic violence situations, or there's a reason that you feel unsafe in your home. So we can help with that as well. And then we have an abuser intervention program as well that's housed in Towson. And that is it's typically court mandated, and that is a 26-week program that we work with abusers through 2 stages. The first stage is education, the second stage is more of a kind of like a counseling group in a way. We talk about what's really going on in your life, more personal stuff, and we get to the emotional side of the abuse. So that's in our Towson office. I believe that is everything in our Towson office. That's kind of our main office. And we also have our intake coordinators as well there too. So if you are looking for any of our services, you can call either the Towson office or our city office. We have an intake coordinator in both offices that can kind of walk you through the process. The intake process, depending on the situation you're calling about, can either be around 5 to 10 minutes. We don't want it to be too long for people. We ask basic questions. We ask questions about which office is going to be best for you, so our city office location or our Towson office location. which one's best for you. If you need help with transportation, we try to help with transportation. We can offer like bus tokens and things like that, but we can't give anything up front. But we can help kind of subsidize that. And so that's our Towson office. Okay, so then our city office. In our city office, we have the community engagement and training department. So if your church, your group, your school, your group of 10 friends wants to learn more about sexual violence, domestic violence, the warning signs, how to help a friend, we can come in anywhere and chat about that, have a discussion, do some activities, a workshop around healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, the warning signs, consents. We do all ages to pre-K to senior citizens. So whatever age group you are, it's never too late or too early to learn about prevention practices. So we have our community engagement and training department. They also control our volunteers as well. So our volunteers will go through that department to kind of learn what the volunteer opportunities are for the month or for the coming months. We have various volunteer opportunities that will be progressing more and more as we move into the summertime. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, turnaround_Inc., to get more updates on volunteerism. And then we have our anti-trafficking department as well in the city office, and that is specifically for people who have been victims of sex or labor trafficking. You can come to our office and we have a drop-in center, we have employment readiness classes, we work with them with housing. We work with various shelters around the state to find emergency sheltering. So we have a 24/7 helpline number it's on these lovely brochures, that helpline number is 24/7, anytime you need anything. You just need to talk to someone for a little bit, talk about a relationship you're in or a friend is in. You need emergency sheltering. We can either put you in emergency sheltering or call around and help you find another shelter, because we get updates of the shelters every night and every weekend of what's available and what's not available. We also have transitional shelter as well. It's quite small, so we only can host 4 families. But we are working to build that up. We have an amazing shelter staff right now in a really lovely place. So that is a shorter term program, about 6 months to a year, I believe, is how long people kind of stay there. And then we help them kind of find the next steps and help them with employment again. That's our main goal, to get them on their feet, get them independent, feeling empowered and be able to be autonomous in their lives again. And then we also have therapists in the city office as well. So our helpline number, I can say it now, is 443-279-0379. So if you need anything at any time of the day, any night, any holiday, any weekend, we are there and ready and willing and able to help you. Someone's always going to be on that other line with as much information that we can provide.
So maybe if you could kind of just walk us through, like, someone who's experienced sexual harassment in their housing, or intimate partner violence, something like that, and just like how it would work from the time they've experienced that to the phone call they give you to what their options are.
Yeah, so they have a range of options. So the first, if you call us through our helpline during the day, it'll get directed to our Towson office, and you'll be talking to one of our legal advocates, and maybe one of our case managers, depending on who's available. You'll talk to them about what's going on, what kind of contract you're in with the housing, with the landlord, how long you've been there, what the situation is, just kind of giving us a general idea of what's going on. And then we can either try to help start finding a new place for you, as well as getting you out of this this lease, whatever it is. So we have our legal advocates ready to go through those processes with you at every step of the way. So the paperwork that you might need to do, someone's going to be there for you each step of the way to fill it out with them, and to make sure that you're getting what you need to. So we have a donation closet as well. So if you need to move out of somewhere really quickly, and you're leaving stuff behind, we have food, we have clothing, we have sheets and towels and things for the home, toiletries, we have full-size toiletries too. So if someone's needs to get out immediately, they can come to our donation closet. They just need to call ahead, and then we'll be able to bring them in, get them what they need, and then be able to find short-term housing, and then hopefully get them into long-term housing. And if they're trying to move states too, we do have some connections with other outside state and we can also call too, to be able to say, okay, you need to leave the state. We will figure out the next best steps and the next best advocate, whether it's us or another state crisis center, to help you make sure that transition's as smooth as possible.
Could you just talk a little bit about some of the warning signs of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and then the prevention practices that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are about like 8 or 9 top warning signs. Although the one thing I say to people when I do prevention, when I do these presentations, is just if something's not feeling right in your gut, give yourself a minute to listen to what your gut is saying, and then go forward. Just kind of pulling that friend aside and being, hey, like, I haven't seen you in a while. How is your relationship going? Or like, I really care about you and I just want to chat. I'm just not feeling great about this relationship. So the major warning signs are isolation. So if you're in a relationship and the person you're seeing starts getting really jealous and controlling of like where you can go, who you can see, and they're slowly cutting you off from the support people in your life, whether that be your family, friends, coworkers, you're slowly stopping seeing them because your partner says they're jealous or they're angry or they feel left out or they're embarrassed, whatever it is. There could be, if there's no ability to have a conversation around that, we see that as a major warning sign, isolation. Controlling and manipulative behaviors as well, really big warning signs. So we talk about the term gaslighting, which basically means someone's making you feel crazy, making you feel like you're making things up, blaming you for things, telling you that, oh, I never said that, or I didn't really hit you that hard, you're just faking the injury. Of course, physical violence is a huge warning sign. Strangulation as well, so we've been learning a lot more about the long-term effects of strangulation. If someone has experienced strangulation, there could be longer-term effects on the brain that we are really seeing a lot more research on. So marks on the neck, of course, on the wrist, any bruises at all is a big warning sign. And extreme jealousy, some manipulation, mood swings as well. So if someone is like pretty okay with something at the moment and then they just flip out another second and they blame you, and they're only blaming you. If they're like hitting other people, if they're being violent in other ways, that could be something else. That could be anger management issues, that could be alcoholism, drug abuse. But alcoholism, anger management don't cause domestic violence. Domestic violence causes domestic violence, so we want to make sure those are kind of separate. But yeah, so those are like the major warning signs of an unhealthy or abusive relationship. Also technological and financial abuse too. We might not see them. Talking about finances is pretty taboo in our country sometimes, but someone could be controlling your finances. If you have a family, if you have children, they could be saying, okay, you get an allowance of $20, but every time you need to spend money, you have to ask me first, because I don't trust you, or like you're not taking care of things right. And they're blaming you for things, and you're only allowed to do so much without them. So those are the major warning signs we see.
Can you talk a bit about folks who come to you who have experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault, but it's not like intimate partner violence? You guys do things aside from partner violence?
Yes, yeah. So if it is like a one-time incident, because we see a lot of sexual assault within the domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but if it is a one-time incident, we do help those people as well, of course. Those are sometimes the scariest situations because you might not know that person as well, or you just don't know what the person's going to do next. And that can also carry a lot of guilt and shame too around those situations. So we really do push for therapy in those situations. We'll never make anyone do anything they don't want to do. So when a survivor comes in, a victim survivor comes in, they have all of these options, and we just say, which would you like to do? You can report to the police. We can just do confidential services. We have group counseling as well. They have all these options, so we kind of lay them all out and say, what is going to be best for you right now? If they need to, we also, within the first 3 to 5 days, you can get a sexual assault forensic exam. And for the county, that's at GBMC that you can get that at, and they just built a really new, beautiful unit for safe exams to be done in. So the sexual assault forensic exams can last anywhere between 2 to 7 hours. They can be really long, but there's going to be an advocate at the hospital that you're at to walk you through that process. That's just to get as much evidence as possible. And then a mercy in the city. That's where you can get the exam done here. But you need to get the exam done where there's a forensic nurse. So that's also an option, but not necessary. But that's an option that has a small window. And so people might report a year later or want to get services a year later. So we say that that's, of course, an option. So we want to be there whenever they're ready to talk about it, whenever they're ready to heal or be assisted with whatever they're going through. We provide the same services for them, too. So like legal services as well, if someone needs that. We have those there, too.
And then you mentioned briefly prevention practices. If you could just talk a bit about prevention practices.
Yeah, so that's really my department and my child. I work with two amazing people in our community engagement department where we do prevention at all levels. The main type of prevention we're doing is talking to elementary and middle school students about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about non-sexual consent as well. So talking about you need to ask and listen for the response and then respect whatever their response is, their yes or their no. And if someone says maybe, be like, no worries, like don't take it personally, just walk away from it. So yeah, we do a lot of prevention in elementary and middle schools, and we work with both city and county schools. So that's a bulk of our prevention practices. We also do a lot of tabling events too, where we bring our resources, try to reach out to as many people as possible, and just try to offer services, our education services as much as possible. So education, and we talk about restorative justice as well as like some main prevention practices we're taking.
Can you speak a little bit about what restorative justice is?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I just tossed that word out. Sorry. So restorative justice is a form of, it can be a form of prevention, it can be a form of education that focuses on the harm that has been done, focusing on the parties that were involved in that harm, and what we can do next to restore ourselves from that harm. So it really believes that both sides, if you will, if there's two people involved, both sides need to be able to heal. Of course, the side that has done the damage needs to understand that there was harm done, that they have put harm in someone else, and that they need to learn and go through an education process. So the abuser intervention program is one of those methods that they need to learn what it means, what they have done, and what that means to that person, and to go through sort of education and be able to have a support system around that education and that process that they're going through. And then for the survivor, we want to make sure it's really survivor-centered. We have a survivor-centered process. So that survivor gets the therapy, gets the case manager, is able to also learn about what it means to heal, what self-care looks like, grounding techniques, all of these things to be able to have both in the moment emergency, like if there's a trigger or panic going on, and also long-term solutions and healing processes they can go through. So restorative justice really focuses on not just the individual that's harmed, but the interpersonal and community level that they're going to be have to be a part of, because they're not going to be able to be removed from the community. Either party sometimes is not able to be removed from the community, but how can we make that community stronger and grow from this harm that was created? Yeah. So that's what restorative justice is. Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty good. Maybe if you just want to reiterate again, like who's eligible for your services, and just like what number they need to call or how to get in touch.
Yeah, so every human being is eligible for turnaround. Whatever your age is, whatever your race, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that, we serve all people who are victims, survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, child abuse. So our main office number for intake processes, if you're looking for that, is 410-377-8111. And our helpline number, which is 24/7, any night, day, any holiday, any weekend, 443-279-0379. And again, our services are free of charge. We don't ask for money or insurance or anything like that. So we don't want anything between you and your healing process and the next steps of your life that you want to take on. So we are available. Please give us a call. Even if you want more information about services, we don't take any information that you don't want to give us. So if it's like an anonymous call, you're just like, I need some advice, we can do that too. It's not, we do whatever the caller, whatever the person wants to do next, unless it is like immediate threat or like there's like impending violence happening. We have to report on that. But other than that, we can help anybody in the situations. Yeah.
In addition to Turnaround Inc., other resources include My Sister's Place Women's Center, House of Ruth Maryland, and Adelante Familia. Now that you have learned about fair housing laws and other relevant laws in Baltimore City, let's finish up today by reviewing the Test Your Knowledge questions. 1. What year was the Fair Housing Act amended to include sex as a protected class? That would be 1974. 2. What duties do property owners or property managers have to prevent or stop sexual harassment? A property owner or property manager has a duty not to engage in sexual harassment. Additionally, a property owner or manager has the duty to ensure that his or her employees or agents do not engage in sexual harassment. Number 3. Is it a violation of the Fair Housing Act when a woman sexually harasses a man? Yes, the Fair Housing Act protects both men and women from sex discrimination, including sexual harassment. It is a violation of the Fair Housing Act for a female property owner, manager, agent, employee, or contractor to sexually harass a male applicant, tenant, or resident. 4. Can a property owner or property manager be held liable if a tenant sexually harasses another tenant? Some courts have held owners and managers, including condominium associations, liable in situations where they knew of tenant-on-tenant harassment and did not take remedial action. 5. What is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? Sexual orientation is a person's physical, emotional, or romantic attraction to another person, while gender identity is about one's own sense of self. 6. Does an individual have to report sexual harassment to the property owner or property manager? No. So hopefully you have learned all of these things and more from today's presentation. For questions or to request further training, please call the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission at 410-396-3143. Thank you.